Hi guys!
Hello!
And today we will talk about 7 main disadvantages of Canada. Depending on where you come from and what you plan to do when in Canada, some of these disadvantages might not seem like a big deal to you.
However, given the lifestyle and the ambitions that Anna and I have, we're really eager to share some of the things that we're frustrated about in Canada. And while some of these things are fixable, others are not so much, and it's just something you'll have to deal with if you decide to move to Canada. So if you'd like to mentally prepare yourself to what life in Canada has to bring, or just curious about disadvantages of Canada, keep watching this video. And if you want to stay in touch, make sure to join our Facebook group or subscribe to our updates in the description box below.
Let's get started. Let's start with what I call risk aversion. Canadians are very conservative and they like to play it safe, and you can see it in everything they do. Business, relationships, technology, hiring new employees, government services, and list goes on. And there have been multiple reports issued by the government itself to confirm this statement. The easiest and most common example of this for newcomers is getting your first qualified job in Canada without Canadian work experience. Or how about getting a credit card or a loan as a newcomer? Try that and let me know how it goes.
I think risk aversion plays a huge role in Canada's slow economic growth. It especially affects small business growth because it's practically impossible to get loans or investments in Canada for small business. Lending standards in Canada are so high that you need to show at least 3 years of profits on your business just to qualify for a loan from a Canadian bank. 3 years! That means that if you'd like to open up a startup or a new business, you can't even dream of getting a loan without putting a significant collateral on beforehand. Overall, startup and small business ecosystem has struggled with getting Canadian investments as well at the level compared to the United States. That is why many Canadian businesses now have foreign, primarily American investors, and luckily US investors have a much higher risk tolerance. Canada is making it harder to start and fund Canadian businesses, and that in turn contributes to slower technology development rates. For anyone who's ever lived in Europe or in the US, you might notice the slow and the archaic healthcare or banking systems and how they work, not to mention the consumer technologies, which are a lot less advanced than Europe or Asian technologies. But the conversation about tech in Canada is a whole other story worthy of a separate video, so let's move on.
Let's talk about healthcare. This is our favorite topic to roast Canada on. Americans love to complain about sky-high prices on Medicare, but hey, at least it works and you actually get help. In Canada, it can take you 6 months just to get an appointment with the doctor you want to see, or how about 12 months to wait to get your medical test done. This is the level of service you get when you have a medical system sponsored by the government. Since the government has constricted budgets on the healthcare, they have to impose restrictions on things like the amount of doctors because they need to pay them salaries, or the amount of available equipment because they need the budget to buy the new machines. All that translates in long waiting lines and dismissive doctors who barely have time to listen to you, and greater restrictions when it comes to global pandemics. And now let's talk about distances. Distances in Canada are very large, because Canada is the second largest country in the world, and the cities are widely spread apart. So if you only have 2 weeks of vacation, which is standard in Canada by the way, those travel times in Canada will really bite, because you want to make every hour and every day of your vacation count. Let's say you're located in Toronto, the most populous city in Canada, and you want to travel to Montreal. It'll take you 6 hours to drive or to go by train. And if you want to go all the way to the west coast, Vancouver, it will take you 6 hours to fly. And going all the way to the east, to Halifax, let's say, will take you 2 hours of flight or 17 hours to drive. Now, because distances are so large, the ticket prices are very high. So flights and trains will come in costly for you if you want to travel in Canada. I've personally known a handful of people, hi Yulia, who abandoned their life in Canada just so they can travel freely and cheaply around the world. And personally for me, traveling is pretty high up on the list of reasons why I would consider leaving Canada for a couple of years.
You're probably realizing by now that traveling to other countries in Canada is probably even more expensive and costly. If you come from anywhere in Europe, not to mention Asia, you'd have to brace for long-haul flights with multiple connections and jet lag. The only thing you're left with is traveling to the US, which could be an average 2 or 4 hours flight. And if you're international parks, you're definitely in for a treat in Canada or in the US because it's very rich with its nature and natural parks. But if you'd like to opt in for some art, culture, or architecture, you might want to opt in for a long-haul flight. Talking about costs, we cannot not mention the housing crisis in Canada. Housing costs have been moderately unreasonable in Vancouver and Toronto for the last decade, mostly due to the foreign investments influx in cities like Vancouver, while foreign people will buy up houses and drive up real estate prices. But in the last couple of years, since COVID, the situation has gotten way out of hand in almost every city in Canada. The prices in Toronto real estate market, for example, have gone up 30% or even more sometimes, while the average income has only gone up by 4%.
And while in Calgary home prices are not yet hyper unreasonable, just earlier this year Calgary has recorded the fastest month-over-month home price rate among the other 27 largest cities in Canada, which is plus 2.1%, and we don't foresee the situation to get any better going forward. So if you're a newcomer to Canada and you have high hopes of buying a home in Canada, brace yourself. You'll either need lots of cash with you, or you'll need to work really hard. No, actually, you'll need to work really smart to be able to afford buying a house in Canada. And if you're not planning to buy a home anytime soon, rental prices in Canada are really high too. And the only escape from that is to opt in for smaller cities or less populated provinces, if that's your kind of jam, or cup of tea, or piece of cake. I'm hungry now. But don't forget that public transport sucks in Canada too, so if you want to relocate to a smaller town, you'll need to spend extra on buying and owning a car.
Another thing that drives me crazy sometimes in Canada is conflict avoidance and political correctness. Canadians do not like conflict. They will never tell you what they really think, and they will always be friendly, polite, and positive. And it's generally actually great, because for us, where we come from, we have a resting bitch face. The downside of this conflict avoidance is that Canadians, especially when it comes to work, don't like doing or saying things that might create some friction between people. So if you really try to seek some candid objective feedback on what you could improve on, or try to have an honest conversation about sensitive situations, you will rarely get the true opinions. And when it comes to conflicts, Canadians prefer to be fairly laissez-faire, letting things resolve by themselves without addressing them directly. And if there is a disagreement that occurs with a Canadian, they will try to look for a compromise, which I think is a wonderful thing. However, finding compromise doesn't necessarily mean that a Canadian won't go and complain about having to make a compromise to their coworker or their boss.
Unfortunately, direct people don't always get recognition they deserve in Canada. They're often perceived as competitive and aggressive. So if you like to speak your mind in Canada, please hold your horses if you want to move up the career ladder. The situation does get better the moment you find yourself in environments with higher immigrant diversity and cultural mix. It's generally easier to have an open and direct conversation with them. But please be careful speaking your mind openly over a cup of coffee with your colleague during a break. There are topics you better avoid and not joke about in Canada, unless you want to hear from your HR regarding a complaint towards you. There is a difference between being candid and rude.
Now, we've just talked about conflict avoidance and aggression and competition. Let's expand a little bit more on competition specifically. We find that Canadians don't like to compete at all, actually. They always prefer to find a compromise because they either want to avoid a potential conflict or they want to avoid losing. And it's understandable. Nobody loves to lose. And this can be observed very well in the overall Canadian industry. Canada's industry is dominated by monopolies and oligopolies, market structures that have one or just a few dominating players.
When such market structure exists in the country, you only have a small group of brands or companies dominating the market. Imagine like you're in a restaurant and it only has 3 items on the menu: To drive it to the extreme, imagine like this is the only restaurant in the entire city. In a situation like this restaurant doesn't have any motivation to improve or diversify their menu. Moreover, they can drive the prices up as much as they want, because they know that people will still buy their food, because they're the only ones providing service in the whole city.
A number of the most important industries in Canada are oligopolies, and the most prime example of that is the finance industry. Canada only has 5 major banks, and all of them have the same mediocre, homogeneous products to offer to Canadian consumer. And there's barely any difference between them. Another prime example is the telco industry or the telecommunications industry. There are 3 major wireless service providers in Canada and they dominate 90% of the market. This results in unreasonably high cell phone and internet prices as well as very poor service, and they have absolutely no motivation to improve because you simply have nowhere to go.
And we're not going to talk about high living costs as a disadvantage in Canada, because we have already talked about it in our other videos. But they're definitely the reason why your bills in Canada are so high, like I am right now. And some people consider this easy access to getting high in Canada a disadvantage too.
You know it already. Canada is so freaking cold. This is an average highs and lows across top cities in Canada. So if you're not into cold temperatures, your options are quite limited. In fact, your only option is getting closer to the Pacific Ocean in BC. Vancouver and Victoria are certainly the most livable climates all year round, with temperatures rarely going below 0 in the winter and staying with comfortable 25 to 30 degrees Celsius in the summer. If you choose to settle in a city like Toronto, Montreal, Calgary or Halifax, you'll most likely have to brace for and deal with temperatures as low as 30 degrees Celsius.
Another thing to be mindful of is snowfalls. Some areas of Canada experience intensive snowstorms, causing low visibility on roads, icy conditions, or simply so much snow that highways are completely blocked by a thick layer of snow. All that creates dangerous driving conditions and raises your car ownership costs in Canada. We've made a video about how to dress warm for Canadian winters, and if you've watched it, you probably noticed that winter clothing isn't cheap, which only adds to this disadvantage. And there you have it. Many people feel frustrated and depressed, especially immigrants from warmer places. And God forbid they don't dress appropriately and fall sick and need a doctor. Well, you already know the rest of the story. And this is how we live in Canada, surrounded by nice Canadians and monopolies, unable to travel as often as we like, and waiting for doctor's appointments for months and months, and trying to stay warm during long Canadian winter nights in rented accommodation that we can't afford to buy. Pretty depressing picture, huh? Makes me wonder, why do some people still strive to move to Canada? What do you think? Leave us a comment below and let's discuss. Or maybe you already live in Canada and you have something to add to this list, so you can warn other people.
And before you start throwing rotten tomatoes at us, please keep in mind that we love Canada, and none of the disadvantages that we've just talked about outweigh the advantages that Canada has to offer. And that's why we're still here. We like it here. So if you're about to write "go back home," you can delete that comment. And as usual, if you liked this video and found it useful, please gently tap the like button below and subscribe to our channel. It really helps our channel out and it will allow you not to miss any of the upcoming videos from us. So with that being said, we'll see you next time, guys, and we're sending you virtual hugs.
Take care!